Have you ever stood in a supermarket aisle, staring at 47 different kinds of jam, and after 5 minutes of reading labels and comparing prices, you just walked away without buying anything? Or maybe you did pick one, brought it home, spread it on your toast the next morning, and instead of simply enjoying it, you found yourself wondering, was that the right choice? Was the other one better? Did I miss out on something? If you've felt that before, and I'm willing to bet you have, you're not broken, you're not indecisive, and you're definitely not alone. What you experienced has a name. Psychologists and behavioral economists have been studying it for decades. It's called the paradox of choice, and it is exactly what we're unpacking today in this deep dive into one of the most thought-provoking books of the last 2 decades, The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz, published in 2004 and still as relevant, maybe more relevant, than ever before.
The central idea of this book is a direct challenge to one of the most sacred beliefs of modern Western culture. We are taught from birth that more freedom equals more happiness, and that more choices equals more freedom. Therefore, more choices must equal more happiness. It sounds airtight. It sounds obvious. But Barry Schwartz, a professor of social theory and social action at Swarthmore College, arrives with mountains of psychological research and says clearly and calmly, that equation is wrong. More choices do not make us happier. In fact, beyond a certain point, more choices make us more anxious, more paralyzed, and ultimately less satisfied with whatever we do choose. And this contradiction, this stunning gap between what we believe and what actually happens, is the paradox at the heart of this book. Here's how our journey is going to unfold today. We'll start at the very beginning. Why do we believe that more choice is better in the first place? And how did we get here? Then we'll look at what Schwartz calls the tyranny of choice, the point at which freedom of choice becomes a burden rather than a gift. From there, we'll go deep into the psychological mechanisms, the invisible forces that transform abundance from a blessing into a source of suffering. Opportunity costs, rising expectations, adaptation, the comparison trap, and the painful phenomenon of post-decision regret. And finally, we'll close with Schwartz's Practical Toolkit, the concrete strategies he offers for reclaiming your peace of mind in a world overflowing with options. This is going to be a long ride, but it's one that will genuinely change the way you look at every decision you make, from what to watch tonight to where to build your career.
Let's start with the man and the moment that sparked this book. Barry Schwartz went to buy a pair of jeans. Sounds mundane, right? But what happened in that store became the seed of everything you're about to hear. In the old days, you walked into a clothing store, asked for your size, got your jeans, paid, and left. Simple. Clean, done. But on this particular day, Schwartz was confronted with an overwhelming array of choices. Slim fit or relaxed, boot cut or straight, stonewashed or raw denim, low rise or high rise, distressed or clean. He spent far longer than he ever had before choosing pants. And when he finally made a decision and went home, he felt something unexpected. He didn't feel happy. He felt worse than he used to feel after buying jeans, back when there was basically one option. He felt a creeping dissatisfaction, a vague sense that somewhere in that store, the perfect pair had been left behind. And the question that hit him was this: why, with more choices than I've ever had, am I less satisfied than I used to be? That question led to years of research, which led to this book. Now, before we get into the psychology, Schwartz sets the scene by showing us just how extreme this explosion of choices has become. The average American supermarket carries over 35,000 different products. Think about that the next time you feel overwhelmed choosing between 18 types of olive oil. In the world of entertainment, streaming platforms now offer tens of thousands of movies and TV shows available at any moment. How long do you spend scrolling before picking something? And how often do you end up watching nothing at all, paralyzed by the options? In education, universities offer hundreds of majors, specializations, and combined degree programs. In career paths, the possibilities seem endless. In relationships, dating apps present you with an effectively infinite scroll of potential partners. We have never, in the entire history of human civilization, been offered this many choices in so many areas of life simultaneously. And according to Schwartz, we have never been more anxious about our decisions.
The scientific evidence that Schwartz builds his argument on begins with a landmark study that has since become one of the most cited experiments in behavioral economics. Psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper set up 2 tasting booths at a high-end grocery store. At one booth, shoppers could sample 6 varieties of jam. At the other, they could sample 24 varieties. The booth with 24 jams attracted more visitors. People were naturally drawn to the abundance. But when it came time to actually buy, the results were stunning. People who had seen only 6 jams were 10 times more likely to make a purchase than those who had seen 24. The larger selection was more attractive to browse, but it was far less effective at helping people actually choose. This is what Schwartz calls choice overload, and it's one of the foundational concepts of the entire book. Choice overload is not just a supermarket phenomenon. It shows up everywhere in our lives. How many people do you know who are stuck in careers they don't love because they couldn't commit to one direction when there were so many options available? How many people delay major life decisions, starting a business, getting married, having children, moving cities, not because they lack desire, but because the sheer number of roads available makes it impossible to commit to any single one? This paralysis, this inability to move forward in the face of abundance, is one of the most costly side effects of the modern world's obsession with offering us more and more of everything. Now, let's go deeper, because Schwartz doesn't just tell us that too many choices create paralysis. He wants us to understand the psychological machinery underneath, the gears and levers that turn abundance into unhappiness. And to do that, he introduces one of the most important conceptual distinctions in the entire book: the difference between what he calls maximizers and satisficers. A maximizer is someone who needs to find the best possible option in any given situation. Not just something good, not just something that meets their needs, the absolute best. When a maximizer goes shopping for a laptop, they read every review available online. They visit multiple stores. They compare specs in elaborate spreadsheets, and they can't commit until they're confident they found the optimal choice. When a maximizer is looking for a job, they send out hundreds of applications and hesitate to accept any offer until they've surveyed the full landscape of what's available. The maximizer's internal standard is always, I need to know I got the best. A satisficer, on the other hand, and this word comes from combining satisfy with suffice, is someone who has a set of clear personal criteria, and once they find an option that meets those criteria, they choose it and move on. They don't feel compelled to explore every remaining possibility before committing. They're not settling for less. They're being intelligent about where they direct their mental energy. A satisficer buying a laptop decides in advance what matters to them: battery life, screen size, price range. They find the first option that ticks those boxes, buy it, and get on with their life. So here's the critical question: who's happier? The research Schwartz cites is unambiguous. Satisficers report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction and well-being than maximizers. Maximizers often end up with objectively better outcomes. They might find a slightly better job offer or a slightly better product, but they pay an enormous psychological price to get there. They experience more regret, more anxiety, more second-guessing, and ultimately less enjoyment of what they chose, even when what they chose is genuinely excellent. Because a maximizer can never fully relax into a decision. There's always that nagging whisper, but was there something better? The satisficer doesn't hear that whisper because they never asked the question in the first place. This distinction matters so much because modern culture and the entire advertising industry are systematically pushing all of us toward maximizer thinking. Every ad tells you that you deserve the best. Every comparison website shows you that there's always something slightly better out there. Every social media feed displays someone else's seemingly superior choices. We are being continuously nudged toward a mode of thinking that, according to the research, reliably makes us less happy. Understanding this is the first step toward fighting back. Now, let's get into the 5 major psychological mechanisms that Schwartz identifies as the hidden engines of choice-related unhappiness.
These are the specific ways in which abundance turns against us. The first mechanism is what economists call opportunity cost, and Schwartz explains why it hits us so much harder than we realize. Every time you choose something, you are simultaneously unchoosing everything else. And the value of what you gave up, what economists call the opportunity cost, subtracts from your satisfaction with what you chose. This was always true in theory, but it matters far more now than it used to, because now the options you're giving up are so much more numerous and so much more visible. When you pick a movie to watch on a streaming platform, you're passing over thousands of other films. When you book a vacation to one destination, you're actively not going to every other destination you considered. When you choose a career path, you're closing doors on many other paths. In a world with few choices, you didn't think much about what you weren't getting. In a world with thousands of choices, the roads not taken haunt every decision you make. Imagine you choose to spend your Saturday afternoon reading a book. In a world with few entertainment options, you enjoy the book fully. That's what you do on a Saturday. But in the modern world, while you're reading, some part of your brain is aware that you could be watching one of hundreds of excellent shows, or going to a great restaurant, or working on a personal project, or calling an old friend, or going for a hike. The book is the same book, but your experience of it is colored by the awareness of everything you chose not to do. The opportunity cost of abundant choices leaks into the present experience and dilutes it. The second mechanism is the relentless rise of expectations. This one is almost cruel in its elegance. Here's the logic. The more options you have, the higher your expectations for whichever option you finally select. If there's one good restaurant in town, you go, you enjoy a decent meal, you leave happy. If there are 500 restaurants in the city and you spent 2 hours reading reviews before selecting one, you arrive expecting a transcendent dining experience. And a merely good meal, the same quality of meal you'd have been delighted with before, now feels like a disappointment. The options themselves generate the expectation, and the expectation destroys the satisfaction. Schwartz calls this the best option problem. When you know that theoretically perfect options exist somewhere out there, any deviation from that imaginary perfection feels like a failure, even when what you have is genuinely wonderful by any objective measure. We construct in our minds an ideal composite, the best features of all the options we saw, and then we compare our actual choice to this imaginary perfection. Nothing real can ever compete with an imaginary ideal. This is a recipe for perpetual mild disappointment. The third mechanism, and this one is one of the most psychologically painful, is post-decision regret. We like to think that once we make a decision, it's done and we can move on. But that's not what happens in practice, especially in a world of abundant choices. Once you've chosen, your mind often keeps running in the background, reviewing the decision, comparing it to the alternatives, asking whether you made a mistake. This is regret, and research shows that it scales directly with the number of alternatives available. When you had 2 options and chose one, you have one other possibility to regret. When you had 100 options and chose one, you have 99 potential sources of regret. More choices mathematically equal more regret.
But here's what makes this even more interesting. Schwartz discusses 2 types of regret, what he calls action regret, regret about things you did, and inaction regret, regret about things you didn't do. Research consistently shows that over long time horizons, people regret inactions more than actions. We regret the businesses we didn't start, the relationships we didn't pursue, the risks we didn't take, more than we regret the things that went wrong. But in the short term, action regret hurts more. This creates a psychological bind. We fear acting because of immediate regret, but failing to act leads to deeper long-term regret. And the more choices we have, the more both types of regret multiply. The fourth mechanism is one of the most fascinating and well-researched in all of psychology, hedonic adaptation. Humans are extraordinarily good at adapting to changes in their circumstances, both positive and negative. Win the lottery? Research suggests that within a year or 2, your baseline happiness returns to roughly where it was before. Suffer a serious injury?
Studies show that people adapt far more than they predict they will. This is actually a beautiful feature of human psychology. It allows us to recover from hardship and avoid getting too comfortable during good times. But it creates a specific problem in a world of abundant choices.
The trap is, when you have many options, you're constantly aware that there's something different and potentially better just around the corner. So just when adaptation would normally cause you to fully appreciate and enjoy what you have, the awareness of alternatives prevents that adaptation from delivering its psychological dividend. You never fully settle in and enjoy what you've chosen because there's always an upgraded version available, a newer model, a better apartment in a different neighborhood, a more exciting job at a different company. The result is a kind of permanent restlessness, a background hum of "this is good, but" that never quite lets you arrive. The fifth mechanism, closely related to adaptation, is social comparison. This is ancient human behavior. We've always benchmarked ourselves against others in our community, but there's a crucial difference between how this worked for most of human history and how it works today. For thousands of years, your reference group was the people in your village, your neighborhood, your immediate social circle. Your comparison set was small and local. Today, social media gives you instant visual access to the highlight reels of billions of people's lives. You scroll through Instagram and see someone's beach house, someone else's extraordinary travel adventures, a third person's seemingly perfect family life and thriving career. These are not real representations of these people's lives. They are curated, filtered performances. But your brain doesn't fully account for that. It registers them as real comparisons, and it raises your internal benchmark for what a good life looks like. When your reference group was your neighbors, a comfortable and meaningful life could feel genuinely satisfying. When your reference group is the most aesthetically successful moments from the lives of everyone on the internet, nothing ever feels quite enough. And more choices feed this cycle. Because the more you know what's possible, the wider the gap between your life and the imagined best life becomes. Schwartz is clear that this isn't about envy being a character flaw. It's about the natural human tendency towards social comparison being hijacked by a media environment designed to maximize your feeling of lacking something, because that feeling drives consumption. Now let's bring this all together and ask the philosophical question that Schwartz doesn't shy away from. What is the relationship between choice and freedom? And is more freedom always better? We defend abundant choice in the name of freedom, and freedom is genuinely one of the most important values in human life. But Schwartz draws a careful distinction between two very different things that often get lumped together under that word. There's freedom in the deep sense, the ability to direct your own life, to make meaningful decisions about your values, relationships, and purpose. And then there's what he calls trivial freedom, the freedom to choose between 47 jams or 200 styles of jeans. Genuine freedom is a human right and a profound good. Trivial freedom is largely noise. And the advertising industry brilliantly conflates the two, so that buying more stuff feels like an expression of your deepest autonomy. The disturbing implication, and Schwartz addresses this directly, is that societies with fewer consumer choices in certain domains sometimes report higher satisfaction in those domains. This is not an argument for authoritarianism or for restricting genuine freedoms. It's an observation that in the realm of consumer and lifestyle choices, we have confused the abundance of options with genuine liberation, and that confusion is costing us our peace of mind.
This connects to something Schwartz discusses at length, the impact of abundant choice on personal identity. Who are you in a world where everything is optional? Traditional societies gave people strong inherited identities: religion, community, profession, family role. These structures could be limiting, certainly, but they also provided a scaffold of meaning and self-understanding. Today, in a world where almost every aspect of identity is a choice, many people find themselves facing what Schwartz calls the burden of self-determination. You must choose your values, your lifestyle, your community, your beliefs, your aesthetic, your career, your relationship structure, all of it, all the time, from an unlimited menu. This is exhilarating in some ways, but it's also profoundly exhausting. The existential weight of total self-creation
is one of the quieter costs of maximum choice. Now, and this is where the book earns its place as not just a diagnosis but a guide, let's talk about what to actually do about all of this. Barry Schwartz offers a clear and practical set of strategies for reclaiming your psychological freedom in a world that offers too much of every other kind of freedom. The first strategy is deceptively simple, but requires real practice. Choose when to choose. Not every decision deserves the same investment of mental energy. Schwartz suggests that you consciously decide in advance which categories of decisions merit deep deliberation and which ones you'll handle quickly with a good enough standard. Big life decisions, career direction, relationships, where to live, how to invest your time, these do not. By consciously allocating your decision-making energy to what truly matters and setting a first good option rule for everything else, you protect your mental bandwidth for the decisions that actually shape your life.
The second strategy is to practice being a satisficer rather than a maximizer, at least in most areas of life. This doesn't mean accepting mediocrity. It means deciding your criteria in advance, before you start looking. Before you shop, ask yourself, what do I actually need this to do? What are the 3 or 4 things that matter most to me here? Then, look until you find something that meets those criteria, and stop there. Resist the urge to keep looking to see if they're slightly better. The research is clear that this practice leads to more satisfaction, not less, even when the outcome is objectively slightly inferior to what a maximizer might have found. The peace of mind more than compensates. The third strategy Schwartz recommends is to actively work on reducing regret. One of the most powerful ways to do this is to make decisions feel more final once you've made them. Not because you should never change your mind. You should when you have good reason to. But because the open-endedness of "I could always undo this" keeps you in a state of half-commitment that prevents you from fully investing in and enjoying your choice. When you buy a couch and spend the next 3 weeks wondering if you should return it, you never actually get to enjoy the couch. Make the decision, commit to it mentally and emotionally, and then direct your energy toward making the most of what you chose rather than second-guessing it. Studies on irreversible decisions consistently show that people are happier with choices they cannot undo than with equivalent choices they can reverse. The finality, counterintuitively, brings peace.
The fourth strategy is to practice deliberate gratitude as a direct counter to hedonic adaptation. Since we know adaptation will gradually reduce the emotional impact of anything good in our lives, we can actively work against it by pausing regularly to notice and appreciate what we have. This is not the kind of forced positivity that tells you to feel good about bad situations. It's the more specific practice of directing your attention back to the things in your life that were once exciting and new, and consciously reconnecting with what made them feel that way. The goal is to slow down the adaptation process by keeping the good things in your life vivid and present, rather than letting them fade into invisible background. Research on gratitude practice consistently links it with higher reported life satisfaction, and now you understand a key psychological reason why. It's a direct antidote to the hedonic treadmill. The fifth strategy is to deliberately limit social comparison. This requires honest self-examination. Schwartz asks, who are you actually comparing yourself to, and is that comparison serving you or punishing you? If you are comparing your internal experience to other people's external presentations, which is almost always what happens on social media, the comparison is systematically unfair and will reliably make you feel worse. The most psychologically useful comparison is with your own past self. Are you growing? Are you living more in alignment with your own values than you were a year ago? Are you kinder, more skilled, more purposeful? This kind of comparison motivates without demoralizing because it's honest, it's personal, and it's within your control.
The sixth strategy is one that sounds paradoxical until you understand why it works. Constrain your choices voluntarily. Set personal rules that reduce the number of options you consider in routine situations. Some people find tremendous relief in things like a simplified wardrobe, fewer items, all of which they like, so that getting dressed in the morning is frictionless. Others batch their media consumption. 1 book at a time, 1 podcast series at a time, rather than maintaining a sprawling queue of 50 things they're planning to get to.
Still others create default choices for recurring decisions. The same breakfast every day, the same route to work, the same category of restaurant when eating out alone. These self-imposed constraints aren't deprivations. They are conscious choices to preserve cognitive energy for things that matter more. The freedom you give up is trivial. The peace of mind you gain is real. The seventh strategy Schwartz offers is learning to make peace with good enough as a conscious philosophy, not a resignation. The phrase good enough has a bad reputation in a culture that prizes excellence. But Schwartz makes the case that good enough is actually the philosophy of people who are excellent at the things that matter to them, because they don't squander their energy on being perfect at everything. The world's best surgeons don't agonize over which brand of pen to use at the hospital. The most creative artists don't spend hours optimizing their morning routine. They protect their best energy for their best work by letting good enough govern the rest. The Satisficer mindset isn't about mediocrity. It's about strategic excellence applied where it actually counts.
One of the deeper threads running through the entire book is the relationship between choice and autonomy, and it leads Schwartz to a surprising claim. We often mistake being forced to choose for being in control. Having more options feels like more control, but if we lack clear values and criteria to guide those choices, we are actually less in control. We're just more susceptible to external influences like advertising, social trends, and the recommendations of algorithms designed to keep us clicking. Real autonomy comes not from having unlimited options, but from having a clear sense of what matters to you and why, so that you can choose with confidence, regardless of how many alternatives exist. In this sense, knowing yourself deeply, honestly, specifically, is the most powerful choice management tool of all. Schwartz also makes a point that extends beyond the individual level, and it's worth taking seriously. He argues that the question of how much choice is too much is not just a personal psychology problem. It's also a question for society and for institutions. Companies can design their product offerings and decision processes in ways that are genuinely more helpful to consumers. Fewer redundant options, clearer defaults, better design that makes the important differences visible and the trivial ones less prominent. Governments and policymakers can think about how the structure of choices in healthcare, education, and retirement savings affects the ability of ordinary people to make good decisions for themselves. This is not about taking choice away from people. It is about designing choice environments that serve human flourishing rather than simply maximizing the appearance of abundance.
At this point, I want to step back and reflect on the full weight of what Schwartz is saying, because I think it's easy to read this as pessimism about modern life and miss what is actually quite an optimistic message underneath. He is not saying that the modern world is bad, that freedom is overrated, or that we should return to some idealized, simpler past. What he is saying is this: the particular cultural story we tell about the relationship between choice and happiness is wrong, and following it uncritically is making many people miserable in ways they don't fully understand. Once you see the mechanism clearly, the way expectations rise with options, the way regret multiplies with alternatives, the way comparison steals presence, you are no longer a passive victim of it. You can work with your psychology rather than against it. The message at the heart of the paradox of choice, when you strip it down to its core, is something close to this. The good life is not found by maximizing your options. It's found by knowing what you value deeply enough that most choices become easy, by committing fully to your decisions once you've made them, by resisting the constant siren call of "but what about something better?" and by cultivating genuine appreciation for what you already have. None of this is easy in a culture that profits from your dissatisfaction, but all of it is possible, and the research says it works.
There's a concept that Schwartz doesn't name explicitly, but that runs implicitly through the entire book, and it might be the most powerful takeaway of all. It's the idea that the quality of your choices is determined less by the number of options you evaluate and more by the clarity of your values. Someone who knows exactly what kind of life they want to build, what they care about deeply and what they don't, what trade-offs they're willing to make and which ones they're not, that person can navigate a world of infinite choices with relative ease. They don't need to evaluate everything because they know what they're looking for. Their values do the filtering for them.
The person who suffers most in a world of abundant choice is the person who hasn't done that inner work, who hasn't decided deliberately and honestly what actually matters to them, as opposed to what they've been told should matter. This is why the book, despite being grounded in behavioral economics and social psychology, ultimately has a deeply philosophical core. It's not just asking why shopping is stressful. It's asking how you want to live and what kind of relationship you want to have with the relentless stream of options that modern life places in front of you. Do you want to be a passive processor of possibilities, drifting from one comparison to the next, always half-satisfied and vaguely restless? Or do you want to be an active, intentional agent, someone who makes choices from a clear center, commits to them with confidence, and finds genuine satisfaction in the life they've actually built, rather than perpetually mourning the lives they didn't choose?
Barry Schwartz's answer, and I think it's the right one, is that you can be the second kind of person. It doesn't require extraordinary willpower or the perfect circumstances. It requires awareness, the kind of awareness that comes from understanding the mechanisms we've talked about today. It requires practice, the habits of the Satisficer, of deliberate gratitude, of limiting unnecessary comparison. And it requires a willingness to reframe what a good decision actually looks like. A good decision is not necessarily one where you explored every possible option. A good decision is one that aligns with your genuine values, that you made with adequate information, and that you can commit to fully. By that standard, making good decisions becomes far less exhausting, and the life you build from those decisions becomes far more satisfying. So here's the question I want to leave you with as we close out today. Think about one area of your life where you currently feel stuck or dissatisfied with a decision you've made or are facing. Now ask yourself, is the real problem that you don't have enough options? Or is the real problem that you haven't gotten clear enough on what actually matters to you in this particular area? My guess, and Barry Schwartz would agree, is that in most cases, it's the second. You probably already have enough options. What you might need is more clarity, not more choice.
We live in an age of extraordinary abundance, and that abundance is genuinely miraculous in many ways. People who lived a century ago could barely have imagined the range of possibilities open to most people in the developed world today. But abundance is a tool, not a destination. Whether it makes your life better or worse depends almost entirely on how wisely you use it. And wisdom here looks less like knowing about all your options and more like knowing yourself well enough that the right options become obvious. That's the paradox, and that's the invitation. Not to want less, but to know yourself enough that you naturally reach for what truly serves you and let the rest go without regret. If this summary gave you something real to think about, something you'll carry with you past the end of this video, go ahead and let me know in the comments. What's the area of your life where you feel the most overwhelmed by choice right now? And what's one thing you're going to do differently after today? I'll see you in the next one.